You wake before the sun has reached the blade-bright rim of the mountains, the air so thin it feels like a careful hand pressed over your lips, and in this pale, breathless morning you are a small point of warmth wrapped in vivid wool and fine combi cloth that someone else wove long before you imagined you could wear such brightness. A hummingbird green shawl pinned with a heavy silver tupu against your shoulder, and a red thread braided through your dark hair, a signal to the wind and to watchful eyes that you are not only a child but a promise made by many voices, a promise that will be honored upon a high and sacred place. You listen for the llama bells and the slow murmurs of the keepers and attendants. You listen for the scrape of sandals across frost-stiff ground and the whisper of prayers that slide like smoke toward the eastern horizon where the sun, Inti, waits in the quiet before his climb. And you notice, as your small warm breath paints a dim cloud before you, that even the earth seems to be breathing with you, that the packed soil gives back a faint sigh when you shift your weight, and this makes you feel, as you have been told again and again, that you are not separate, that your bones and the mountain's bones are kin, and that the day that has arrived has been moving toward you since before you knew the word for day. Your likla is fastened snugly, and you hold the braided sling that your mother pressed into your hands when you left home, a sling that smells like smoke and wool and the oil from her fingers, and you keep your eyes on the sky because it is easier than looking at the faces of the men and women who tend you now, easier than searching their features for answers they will not give, because their answers live in the rhythm of ritual and in the places you will soon walk, and so you let your gaze drift to the sharp, clean edge of the mountain, to the white that burns your eyes even before the sunlight has struck it, to the places in the rock where the wind is caught and made into a voice that is not your language but is a language nevertheless. They offer you coca leaves, and you pull back your cheeks and press them into that soft hollow, and your tongue grows bitter and your mouth grows numb and a dull green calm slides down into you like cold water traveling through a long narrow channel, and you breathe again, easier now, each breath deepening in the space that seems to have stretched between your heartbeats. You breathe and notice how your stomach, which woke up afraid earlier, has settled into a shy, obedient quiet, and you take the carved cup, the kero, in your small hands and sip the sweet sour chicha that reminds you of harvesting, of laughter that spills over hands stained with maize dust, of a courtyard where the sun pooled like gold. You sit, tucked into yourself on a low stone, and you watch the attendants tie bundles with practiced fingers, small cloth packets that carry figurines and tiny llamas of silver bright birds of shell, little men and women of soft gold who will rest beside you when the sky is closest, and as their knots cinch and hold you feel a mirror inside your chest, a set of invisible knots tightening as if to keep something treasured from spilling out too soon, and you remember how the quipu keeper held those ropes threaded with colored cords, and told you that everything worth knowing can be knotted and carried by a patient mind, that every step can find its place in the weave of time. They tell you the name of this day, though you already know it, because the name has been rising through your dreams like vapor. The name has walked ahead of you on the Quipa the great road of the Sapa Inca, and it has waited for you in the tambos where you slept, and it has leaned in the doorways of shrines where you bowed to huicas and breathed in the weight of incense and old blessings. And if you close your eyes now, you can taste the dust of the road, bright as pollen and heavy as history, and you can hear the footfalls of those who walked beside you, their sandals whispering the same quiet prayer with every step. You remember the day, like a sharp-edged shell that fits perfectly in your palm, when the envoys came to your village and the headman stood straighter than you had ever seen him stand, and your mother put her hand on the crown of your head and smoothed your hair with fingers that trembled and did not tremble, both at once, and they told you that the Sapa Inca had chosen, that the empire's breath had reached as far as your doorway, that a great blessing and a great weight had crossed the mountains to sit in your lap, and you wore your best tunic, and your mother washed you in water that smelled like herbs and warm stone, and when you turned in that water you saw reflected there a face that suddenly seemed older. You were taught that the mountain spirits, the apus, are not simply piles of stone and loops of snow, but ancestors who stood up when the world was young and held open the sky, that Pachamama hums underfoot, and that the sun and the moon, Inti and Mama Quilla, take your footsteps into account when they climb and when they descend, and you were told that the capacocha, the capahucha, is the great ceremony in which the best and brightest are braided into the life of the empire and the health of the people, that hunger is balanced and sickness is turned aside, and battles calm their teeth when a gift is carried carefully into the high still places where human breath and cloud breath become the same. So you learned not to cry when the road rose far above the green terraces, and the terraces rose far above the last houses, and the houses rose far above the river, because this is what everyone told you they would say about you when you reached the high shrine, that you were brave and calm and small like a seed the wind carries in open palms, And sometimes as you walked, you felt the seed inside you growing its first quiet root, stretching and splitting and sliding into the darkness of something bigger than yourself. And you could not help but look up and smile at the hawks who circled, and listen for those bright silver bell llamas, as if the bells kept time with your many, of equal length, top-of-the-world heartbeats. Today is the day, and yet it feels like a day and not a day, because the morning is full of the same sounds that always fill mornings. The careful sigh of water heating, the low voice of the elder telling a small joke to a sleepy attendant who smiles but does not laugh, the brush of a hand over a woven cloth to smooth its hair like the flank of a horse. And you wonder if the sun notices that this is not an ordinary day for you, or if the sun is too busy to notice you until the hour comes, when the priests lift their hands in greeting, and the gold flashes in their ears and in their eyes. The climb is different when it is not a journey but a ceremony, and you feel that difference as they lift you, not because your legs are too tired to carry you, but because your feet have already walked all the steps they needed to walk, and now the steps belong to hands and to words and to air, and the cold is a thin, careful blade that cuts but does not cut, a cold so clear that it feels like a story told perfectly, a cold that sharpens every edge of sight until the world looks newly carved, and you are full of a slow and sturdy quiet that, when you listen for it, sounds like your grandmother's old songs, the ones that travel back and forth in the body like breath. You pass a place where offerings have gathered like snowflakes agreeably collected into a drift, tiny textiles like sleeping birds, the bones of small animals polished by time and attention, feathers that are still bright, and a ring of stones where someone burned something fragrant long ago, and you are told, not for the first time, that when a place is sacred it is because attention has soaked into it like rain into a garden, and for a moment you feel proud, as if your attention, your small serious gaze, is a kind of blessing you can give freely, as if by seeing the mountain you are feeding it a sweet it has asked for. You think of the Sapa Inca then, and you think of the gold mask you saw once, just once when the world tilted and let you glimpse the face of power, and you remember the perfect curve of the ear and the way the lips held still, and the eyes watched every corner of the room at once, and you remember the way people moved around that empty face like water running around a stone, and the hush that gathered even in the noise of celebration, and you wonder, with an earnestness that feels like something small breaking free and floating up, if he is thinking of you now, if your steps are traced like a line on a quipu that he can run his fingers over and know. They tell you to rest, and you sit on a folded blanket and press your hands together in your lap so your fingers can talk to one another, and you feel the coca working the way a gentle bird works a knot free from a bit of hair, teasing and breathing and never forcing, and you take another small sip from the cup, the rim smooth and patient against your lip, and the world, which had been full of edges and brightness, softens as if a veil of thin silk cloud has been drawn between you and everything else. And this is not unpleasant. It is like being wrapped in a familiar story that you have heard so many times it begins to turn into your own memory. The priests approach with eyes that seem to hold both your reflection and something beyond it, and their cloaks are heavy and their sandals are quiet, and one of them carries a small figure, all smooth and shining. Another carries little woven bags. Another holds a small knife that is more like a leaf than a blade, meant for trimming cloth and cutting the thread of moments. And they speak to you, not loudly and not softly, just with the kind of voice that expects to be answered with attention rather than words. And they tell you again that you are chosen, that you are treasured, that your bones will become a pillar in the house where wind and sky meet. Your mind moves like a river now, wide and unhurried, and thoughts slide past with their own shining backs above the water, and some of those thoughts are simple and thin, like the word for corn and the word for sun, and some are thick and round, like the way your mother's hand felt when she held your ankle, as if it were a small bird who must not fly away, and some are too large to think in any language you know, so you hum them instead, a hum that vibrates in your teeth and makes the world around you feel closer, as if the rocks are answering back, and perhaps they are, because that is what you have always been told. The path narrows and you are carried, and you move with a gentleness that belongs as much to the carriers as to you, and you pass through a place where the wind is always from the same direction, and someone says that this is where the mountain breathes out and waits for you to breathe in, and you do. You pull the thin, cold thing into your chest and you hold it, and you let it go again, and the letting go feels like a soft, careful surrender, and something inside you opens the way a door opens when a familiar hand rests on it, and then applies just the right amount of pressure. At the crest before the shrine itself, there is a pause that is both ceremonial and tender, a pause in which everyone remembers they are human and separate and together all at once, and one of the women who has watched over you offers a small woven doll and tucks it into your shawl, and someone else touches your forehead with a thumb that smells like smoke and sweet grass, and you tilt your head so that thumb can complete its arc and leave a warmth that, even as it fades, feels like a mark you will carry inside as surely as the red thread woven into your hair. You see the platform, the ushnu, where the offerings are set and where the words are said, and beyond it, carved modestly from the mountain's shoulder, the niche where you will sit when the day becomes afternoon and the afternoon becomes evening, and the evening becomes the long, patient night, and you feel fear. Yes, because to be brave without fear is to be made of wood or stone, and you are not wood or stone. You are something that eats and sleeps and laughs and happens to be quiet now, and so you hold your fear like a child you have been asked to babysit. You keep it close and safe and offer it a little of your coca, and it settles, eyes wet and trusting. The priests speak and the words ring like water poured into a shallow bowl, high and pure, and every word both separate and part of a larger unbroken line. And you listen because listening is your work today. Listening and sitting and being carried and allowing your small warm life to be a light set carefully in a high window, so that those in the valleys can look up and know that the world has not forgotten them, that the sky has not closed its doors, that the empire is still awake and careful and cares for every field and every child and every sickness and every harvest. You are given more coca, and the world's edges soften further, until they are not edges at all but the smooth contours of a sleeping animal, breathing deeply, and a small heat nestles behind your eyes, and your hands, which once trembled at the idea of being looked at by so many careful adults, are steady and cool, and somewhere a condor cuts a dark line across a slate-blue sky, so high that it seems to be a thought rather than a creature, and you think that perhaps you too are a thought today, that you belong to the kind of thinking the mountains do, slow and wide and patient beyond any hunger. The elders tell you a story about the first capacocha, how a child like you, but older and younger than you in all the ways that matter, walked with priests and lords to a peak covered in snow so white it had its own sound, and how the child listened to the wind and heard in it the voices of those who had not yet been born, and when the child closed their eyes and breathed in, the mountain breathed in too, and a long, cold, kind peace fell over the land, as if the stars had slowly poured a bowl of milk over the fields and the city and the roads and the rivers, and you wonder, as you have learned to do, what parts of that story are memory, and what parts are hope. You think of your father's hands, the way his knuckles look like little stones when he holds a tool, the way his thumb smooths down the edge of fabric as if to teach it to behave, and you think of your mother's voice when she answers a question you have not asked out loud, and you think of your friend who tied a knot around your wrist and told you to keep it until it fell off by itself, because knots have to choose their own moment to disappear, and you glance down and see, with a joy that sits all the way down at the base of your spine, that the knot is still there, small and brown and stubborn. It is time to sit in the niche, to fold your legs the way the old women taught you, with care and patience and the knowledge that comfort can be a kind of prayer, to tuck your hands where they will be warm and where they will not seek work to do, because your work is to be still, and the attendants adjust your shawl so that the red thread glows like a little piece of sunset held too close to the heart, and they place the tiny silver llama beside you, and the small gold figure, and you look at the figure's face and it looks back with that gentle not quite smile all sacred faces wear, the kind that says we know and we do not need to say how we know. The wind hushes as if a vast throat has swallowed its song, and is now holding the notes in the careful cup of silence, and you fall further into the soft sleep that coca and chicha and calm have been making for you, and in that sleep you do not dream of running or of falling, you dream of walking on a thread stretched across the sky from one mountaintop to another, and each step is a drumbeat, and each drumbeat is a heartbeat, and each heartbeat is a footstep of the empire, the way a good piece of cloth is the footsteps of a loom, and you are not alone on that thread. You are one more knot, bright and sure. Even as the afternoon light thins, it thickens into gold, and it spills across your face, and a small breeze carries the smell of ice and stone into your nostrils, and you taste metal and pine and old smoke, and your eyes, which were open just enough to catch the line of the horizon where the world tilts, drift closed, and in the darkness inside your lids you see the shape of the condor again, and the condor is speaking to the puma, and the puma is speaking to the serpent, and the serpent, which is not frightening but only long and thoughtful, is speaking to the streams that will run when the snow softens, and the streams are speaking to all the fields. There is no need to hold yourself up any longer, the mountain is doing that for you. Stone holding bone and air holding breath and cloth holding skin, and the breath grows slower, like a drumbeat played farther and farther away, like the echo of a song once sung across a ridge and now remembered by those who were there, and even slower, like a boat leaving a shore you can still see but no longer feel the sand of under your feet, and your thoughts, which had once moved like quick fish, now move like clouds, their edges so soft that their endings are beginnings, and eventually the movement is not movement but the stillness of a great listening. Night arrives the way a teacher arrives, quietly without startling anyone, bearing a smell of cool stone and a show of stars that seems too generous to be believed, and the stars are so many you think they might be small seeds shaken loose from a hand that had been holding them too tightly, and they fall into your eyes even though your eyes are closed, because eyesight is not only for the eyes, and you feel a cottony softness at the edge of your fingers and ears, a softness that hums and whispers and leaves behind the kind of silence that feels like being carried, and you are carried not as a burden but as a song is carried in a well-made flute. Somewhere below, a fire is coaxed to life and then allowed to sleep, and those who brought you here rest their backs against stone that has learned to be a kind of companion, and they speak softly to one another in that special voice people use when they are near a sleeping child, and near the gods at the same time, and one of them thinks of their own children in a village far away, and one of them thinks of the first time they climbed a mountain, and one of them thinks of the sweet smell of maize and the slick feel of a rain-wet stone, and all of those thoughts float upward, and you float with them, anchored and unanchored in a way that only the mountain understands. The cold is a teacher too, a stern one, but not cruel. It insists on stillness and on surrender. It asks for quiet, and gives back a clarity that sharpens the edges of dreams until the dreams can cut through fear, and the cold wraps each finger and toe the way an elder wraps a story, slow and repetitive and full of meaning if you are patient enough to listen. And you are patient, more patient than you have ever been, because you understand that this patience is the last gift you will give in this small, warm body, and you have the dignity to give it fully and without hesitation. In the hours when even the animals hush and only the snow moves, you weather a sea that is made not of water but of air, cold air that moves and presses and recedes and moves again, and it lifts you, and it sets you down, and it sings, and that song pulls at you gently the way a tide pulls at a child's ankles, the way a mother's voice pulls a sleepy head to her shoulder, and you are content to be pulled, because the pulling, like the patience and the stillness, is not a taking but a giving. It is you giving your breath back to the air and the air giving its endless, silent, shining distances to you. In the morning, when the sun finally pulls itself over the rim of the world and pours thin honey down the jagged gullets of valleys, the attendants rise and look toward you, and they do not call your name because the mountain has already learned it and is saying it, slow and low, and one of them presses a hand to the stone and feels the stone's patient heart, and one of them adjusts the edge of your shawl the way a mother would, and one of them bows in that way that does not bend the back so much as it lets the knees remember that they are good for kneeling, and all of them breathe the same cold air and feel it cut and soothe and remind. They speak a blessing over the offerings, not as a farewell but as a completion, a stitching closed of a seam that has run from the day of your choosing to this day, and will, by the nature of such seams, continue to run beyond this present moment, invisible to eyes but not to hearts trained to see what eyes cannot. And they place small stones carefully, not to weigh you down but to build a small house of attention around your courage, a house that will keep the wind from being too curious and the snowfall from being too insistent. And then they step back and let the mountain's voice resume its ordinary business of slow breathing and deep counsel. If you could open your eyes, perhaps you would see what they see, a child dressed like a small king or queen, a child who is not asleep and not awake but housed, a child whose stillness is so complete it teaches everyone present a new kind of quiet. And perhaps you would see, with that second sight that belongs to those whose work is done, how the line of the capacocha gleams faintly in the far distance like a white thread in a dark cloth, and you would smile, because the cloth is whole, because the quipu is tied, because the breath has been given and received. Years move like llamas over a pass, one after another, patient and sure, and storms come and storms go, and emperors rise and walk the gold halls and then rest in the dark quiet, and cities breathe and sleep and wake and forget and remember, and the mountain keeps its watch, and your small house of stone stays where it is placed, and snow drifts and melts and drifts again, and sometimes a condor pauses on a high black tooth of rock, and looks with a round bright eye in your direction, and if you had a voice you would tell it that you are where you are meant to be. People will come someday, with strange words and tools and astonished eyes. They will kneel as if they are apologizing and stand as if they are surprised to have been forgiven. They will speak your story in their own languages and draw your day with their own colors. And they will say child and sacrifice and empire, and they will say freeze and ritual and coca and chicha, and some of them will understand and some will not, and both will be all right, because a story this old is not pulled out of a mountain like a root vegetable. It is approached like a friend sitting very still, and it talks when it wishes and listens when it must. If the world remembers you, it will remember you as a name tied to a shrine, as a face framed by fine cloth, as a small perfect figure seated in the cradle of stone with grace that is not childhood's grace but another kind entirely. And if the world forgets you, the mountain will not, the snow will not, the sky will not. The Apu who breathed through this high place will say your name in each small curl of frost and in each sudden hush of wind, and those who know how to listen will hear it, and those who do not will feel a gentleness in their bones that they cannot explain. and will assume is the kindness of cracking ice or a shifting stone. In the memory of those who walked beside you, there will be one moment that returns again and again, the moment when you looked up into the sky and found not an answer but a belonging so complete it made answers unnecessary, and perhaps that moment came when the cup touched your lip, or when the coca numbed your tongue, or when the shawl settled around your shoulders like a bird landing and rearranging its feathers, or perhaps it arrived when you were already sleeping, and then it would be the kind of belonging that only the sleeping know, the kind that does not need the eyes to be open or the heart to be fast. The empire you served with your quiet will change, like all things change, and men will argue and deal and build and break, and the roads will carry feet you never imagined, and the gold will go where gold goes, and the gods will accept and decline in measures no one can record on a quipu, and yet because the earth appreciates a promise kept, corn will still fledge its green leaves, and potatoes will still sleep and then wake and swell, and children will still run and fall and cry and then laugh, and someone, somewhere, will tell the story of the child the mountain chose, and a small hush will fall as if people had remembered to take a breath they forgot they were holding. Now, as the sun lifts higher and the world tilts toward the business of day, you sit where stone meets sky, and your day, which began in a camp with llama bells and whispered prayers, has become a day that does not end, a circle kept in a high place where circles are easy to see and easy to trust, and if anyone asks, later, what it felt like to be chosen, perhaps the only true answer is that it felt like a knot being tied in a very long rope, a knot that does not break the rope but holds the rope together, a knot that is small and strong and just exactly where it must be. You are that knot, and the rope is the world. You are that small house and the mountain is the world. You are that breath and the air is the world. And none of this can be written on a quipu exactly as it is, because quipus are for numbers and for stories that can be told, and this is more like a song that is sung once and then kept by the stones, a song that shapeshifts into light and cold and height and silence, and the only way to hear it is to go where the air is thin and sit where the earth touches the sky, and listen until the breath in your chest changes its pace to match the breathing of the mountain. The attendants begin their descent, and their feet find the familiar bite of the path, and as they go they do not look back often, not because they do not wish to, but because it is better to look forward when the path is narrow and the air is bright, and one of them traces on their own chest a little sign that is not a sign so much as a reminder to keep their heart open, and another bites a small piece of coca, and presses it into their cheek and thinks of the child they brought here, and the child they will carry, in some other fashion, all the days of their life. Below, the terraces will gleam like scales on the side of a sleeping serpent, and the river will flash and fold and argue with rocks and sing to reeds, and the smoke of cooking fires will lift in little prayers that mean hunger is being answered, and the sun will reach into every court and every field and every place where someone waits for good news, and the good news will arrive, not always in the form asked for and not always with the speed desired, but it will arrive, because the world is built on arrivals and departures, on giving and receiving, on leaving and being left, and on the small and steady courage of those who trust the most ancient promises. If you could speak to those who will one day say your name in their own mouths, you would tell them that honor is a heavy thing but not an unbearable thing, that fear is a friend who needs good company, that stillness can hold more love than movement when the stillness is chosen and gathered and shaped by many hands, and that the mountains are not large because they rise but because they kneel, and if they listen carefully they will hear how the high places are always listening, and they will carry that knowledge down the switchbacks and across the bridges and into their homes, and into their sleep, smarter and softer at once. And if they ask whether the cold was cruel, you would say no, that the cold is honest. It makes no promises it cannot keep. It does not praise what it cannot bless. It asks you to be exactly what you are, and in return it holds you exactly where you need to be. And if they ask whether the coca and chicha were kindness or a trick, you would say they were a door to a room where sky and breath are the same, and you needed that room because all great doors deserve archways, and all long roads deserve resting places where the feet can thank the body for its labor. The day moves on around you, in circles and in lines, and it will always move on, because that is the way days keep promises and keep time, by never staying where they are and by always returning where they have been. A spiral carved into the heart of the world that says again and again what must be said, and in that spiral your name is one bright thread, your day is one bright bead, your breath is one bright bell, and the mountain, faithful as any god, holds all of it and offers it without demand to anyone who knows what it is to be small and brave, and necessary. When clouds gather later, they will not hide you, they will dress you, they will wrap the shrine in soft white, and they will carry the smell of cold and stone to villages where someone will pause and look up and say the mountain is thinking, the mountain is remembering, and because these are true words, their saying will be a blessing, and because you are part of what the mountain thinks and remembers, Their blessing will pass through you the way sound passes through the shell of a drum and becomes music. And for a moment the thin boundary between the living and the remembered will act like a window rather than a wall. The wind rises and then settles, a heartbeat drawn out into a horizon. And over the world confirms what the elders told you, that nothing precious is lost when it is given carefully, that the gods hunger for attention more than for blood, that the most faithful prayers are the ones shaped by the mouth of the earth itself, and that offerings, whether of maize or of cloth or of breath, are not about the gods' need but about yours, your need to be woven into something that will hold when the single strand of your life has reached its end, which is not an end but a knot, which is not a knot but a shining, which is not a shining but a name. So this is your day, this day that belongs to the high place and the patient cold and the slow certain song of people who knew you, and people who did not but know you now, this day that moves like a river because it cannot do anything else and is glad for it, this day that gathers every small step you took and makes a path to a stone cradle, where fear becomes a friend and breath becomes a gift, and the mountain becomes a house, and you, little and great at once, sit where the sky can lean close and listen and, listening, understand everything you are and everything you have given, and though your lips do not move and your hand does not reach and your eyes stay closed, there is in this place a conversation that will go on forever, between the stone that remembers and the snow that forgets, and the wind that learns and the sun that teaches and the child who was chosen, and the world that is always choosing and always being chosen, a conversation that has no final word, because it is a circle that has no end because it is a day that did not stop when night fell and will not stop when day returns, a day that in the highest places of the Andes has always been waiting for you.